I'm Liam, 34 male. I live in a high-rise apartment in Chicago with a view of the city that most people would kill for. As the chief financial officer of Anderson Global, my family's massive logistics corporation, my life is defined by numbers, spreadsheets, and the relentless pressure to perform. But the real story isn't in the balance sheets. It's in the quiet betrayals that happen when no one is looking, especially from the people you're supposed to trust the most. This is the story of how my own family tried to make me the scapegoat for their crimes, and how I used the very tools they taught me to dismantle their empire. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My family, the Andersons, don't live in a house. They occupy a sprawling estate in a wealthy suburb called Oakwood Hills. It's the kind of place with manicured lawns that look like green carpets and iron gates that whisper, "Keep out." Every visit feels less like a homecoming and more like a corporate audit. At the head of this empire is my father, Richard Anderson, 64. He's the CEO of Anderson Global, a man who commands respect with a quiet, icy demeanor. He doesn't raise his voice, he doesn't have to. His disappointment is a tangible force, a cold pressure that has shaped my entire life. To Richard, the Anderson name is a brand, and any blemish on it is an existential threat. My mother, Alina, 59, is the perfect corporate wife. She moves through social events with practiced grace, her smile a beautiful, impenetrable mask. She's a master of de-escalation, smoothing over family tensions with a gentle word or a change of subject. But behind the elegance, I've always sensed a deep-seated fear, the fear of not living up to my father's impossible standards. She never defended me, never stood up to Richard's coldness, but I learned long ago not to resent her for it. She was just another subordinate in his corporate structure, trying to survive. Then there's my younger brother, Ethan, 29. As the head of ventures, Ethan is the golden child, the charismatic heir apparent. He wears expensive suits, drives flashy cars, and possesses a reckless confidence that my father mistakes for ambition. While I spend my days in the trenches, verifying figures and mitigating risks, Ethan is out making deals, spending company money on speculative projects that rarely pan out. He's the visionary, the risk-taker. I'm just the bean counter who cleans up his messes. The contrast between us is a chasm that has defined our relationship. He is the sun my parents orbit around, and I am the distant planet, cold and overlooked. My life in the city is my escape. My apartment is minimalist and orderly, a sanctuary of logic and reason far from the calculated performances of Oakwood Hills. There, every dinner is a board meeting, every conversation a negotiation. I remember my mother's last birthday party a few months ago. I arrived in a simple, well-tailored suit, but I might as well have been invisible next to the glittering, designer-clad guests. My mother's smile was brief before her eyes scanned the room for someone more important. My father gave me a single, curt nod. Ethan, however, made a show of greeting me, slinging an arm around my shoulder. "Big brother, good to see you putting the spreadsheets away for a night," he announced, his voice just loud enough to turn heads. It was a performance, a public display of brotherly affection that felt as hollow as his business proposals. That night I found myself on the balcony, watching the party from a distance. The perfectly orchestrated laughter and clinking glasses felt alien. I wondered if my family had ever had a genuine conversation, one not centered on profit margins or public image. I doubted it. I've always been an outlier in their world. I value honesty and precision, two qualities that are liabilities in an environment built on perception and influence. The numbers I work with are my only comfort. They are impartial, they don't have ulterior motives. They tell the unvarnished truth, and in my family, the truth is a dangerous commodity. For the past couple of years, the numbers at Anderson Global have been telling a grim story. The international shipping market is in a downturn, fuel costs are soaring, and several of Ethan's much-hyped international ventures have turned into financial black holes, draining millions from our reserves. The red ink on our balance sheets is a glaring warning sign, a siren I can't get anyone else to hear. But every time I raise the alarm, I'm met with dismissive silence. Ethan is the architect of this impending disaster. As the head of ventures, he has the autonomy to pour money into high-risk, high-reward projects. The problem is they are all risk and no reward. He makes impulsive investments, partners with dubious international firms, and spends lavishly on business development, which seems to be a euphemism for five-star hotels and extravagant dinners. I've seen the reports and heard the whispers about his mounting personal debts and the shady characters he's gotten involved with. I've tried to warn my father. In board meetings, I present my data with calm professionalism, pointing out the unsustainable cash burn and the lack of due diligence on Ethan's projects. Each time my father looks at me with that familiar, cutting disappointment. Liam, you understand numbers, but you don't understand strategy, he'd say, the words landing like tiny shards of ice. Sometimes you have to spend money to make money. But what he calls strategy, I call gambling with our family's legacy. Meanwhile, Ethan is lauded for his bold vision. He walks into meetings with a dazzling smile and weaves captivating stories of global expansion and untapped markets. The board, charmed by his charisma, nods along. My father beams with pride. I sit there, clutching my pen, a silent Cassandra warning of a future no one wants to see. The pressure is building. Key investors have started asking pointed questions about cost overruns and missed revenue targets. Why is the South American logistics hub costing twice the initial projection? What happened to the partnership in Southeast Asia that was supposed to be a game changer? Predictably, when the heat is on, all fingers point to me. Liam needs to tighten his grip on the financial controls. Ethan will say smoothly in a meeting, a look of faux concern on his face. Perhaps the finance department overlooks something. My father will nod in agreement, his gaze implying that I, the CFO, have failed in my primary duty. It's a carefully orchestrated play, and I'm cast as the incompetent manager. I feel like I'm in a straitjacket, forced to watch as my brother drives the company off a cliff while my father hands him the keys and a roadmap. The stress is relentless. I spend my nights poring over transaction logs and internal reports, searching for a way to stop the bleeding. But the more I dig, the more I realize that this isn't just incompetence, it's deliberate. Expenses are being obfuscated with vague accounting codes. Digital access to certain venture accounts which I once monitored has been revoked. When I confronted Ethan about it, he just laughed it off. Relax, big brother, I've got it under control. But he doesn't, and I know it. Something is being systematically hidden, and I'm being systematically shut out. The betrayal. The weeks leading up to the dinner were thick with a tension so palpable you could almost taste it. Every interaction at the office was a chess move. Ethan would avoid my gaze in the hallways, and my father's silence grew colder, more profound. The unspoken conflict hung in the air, a storm waiting to break. Then one Tuesday afternoon my phone rang. It was my mother, Alina. Her voice was unusually warm, almost pleading. Liam, dear, we're having a small dinner at the estate on Saturday. Just family. To clear the air, please say you'll come. A family dinner to clear the air was code for a strategic maneuver. Our family didn't resolve conflicts, we buried them under layers of civility and pretense. A part of me, the part that still foolishly craved their approval, wanted to believe it was a genuine peace offering. But my gut, honed by years of navigating their emotional minefield, screamed that it was a trap. Still, the weariness in my mother's voice got to me. I'll be there, Mom, I said, the words feeling like a concession. On Saturday evening, I drove out to Oakwood Hills. The estate was lit up, every window glowing like a golden eye in the twilight. It looked beautiful and imposing, a fortress of wealth and secrets. As I parked my car, a text message vibrated in my pocket. It was from an unknown number, just 3 words, be careful tonight. My blood ran cold. I scanned the manicured grounds, but there was no one in sight. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, my mind racing. Who sent it? And what did they know? A sense of dread settled over me as I walked toward the front door, feeling like an actor stepping onto a stage for a play whose ending I didn't know. Inside, the scene was even more unnerving than I'd anticipated. It was just family. Several of Anderson Global's major shareholders and a few senior executives were there, mingling in the grand dining hall. The table was set for a banquet, complete with crystal glasses and extravagant floral centerpieces. This wasn't an olive branch, it was an ambush. My father, Richard, was in his element, holding court at the head of the table, his voice a low, confident hum. My mother drifted between guests, her smile perfect and unwavering. Ethan was the star, of course, regaling a group of investors with a story, his laughter echoing through the room. I felt like an intruder, a ghost at their East. I took a glass of water from a passing server and tried to fade into the background, but my senses were on high alert. I watched my family's every move. Richard's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Ethan kept shooting me quick, unreadable glances. Even my mother, when she briefly touched my arm in greeting, seemed to flinch away, her focus already on a more important guest. Later in the evening, Richard and Ethan made a point of approaching me together. Liam, a toast, Ethan said, raising his glass with a flourish. To family. My father nodded, his expression uncharacteristically soft. We've had our disagreements, but at the end of the day, family forgives, he said. The words were so out of character, so saccharine that they set off every alarm bell in my head. I nodded and took a small sip, the anonymous text message burning in my mind. A short while later, I excused myself to use the restroom. My briefcase containing my laptop and some work files was on a chair by the entrance to the dining hall. As I walked back, I saw Ethan crouched beside it. He was quick, his movements fluid and practiced, but I saw it clearly. He unzipped the front pocket of my briefcase and slipped something inside. He straightened up just as quickly, turning to laugh at something an executive said. He hadn't seen me. My heart hammered against my ribs, but not with fear. It was the cold, clarifying certainty of a long-held suspicion finally being confirmed. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The dinner, the shareholders, the fake sentimentality, it was all a setup. I waited for my moment. When my father and Ethan were deeply engaged in a conversation with Marcus Vance, the company's largest outside shareholder, I casually made my way back to my briefcase. My hands were steady as I opened the front pocket. Tucked inside a folder was a plain manila envelope I'd never seen before. I shielded it from view and opened the clasp. Inside were documents detailing a secret wire transfer of company funds to an account registered under my name. There was also a forged contract authorizing a partnership with one of our direct competitors, complete with a near-perfect forgery of my signature. Finally, there was a burner phone and a USB drive. They were framing me as a corporate traitor, an embezzler who had been selling company secrets. They were going to pin all of Ethan's financial disasters, all the company's losses, on me. My mind went into overdrive. I saw their plan with perfect clarity. They would expose me tonight in front of the shareholders, painting me as the villain who had jeopardized the company. I looked across the room. Ethan was laughing, my father was smiling, and my mother was refilling a guest's wine glass. None of them were paying attention to me. Ethan's suit jacket was draped over the back of his chair just a few feet away. In one swift, silent motion, I slipped the manila envelope out of my briefcase and slid it deep into the inner pocket of his jacket. I returned to my seat, my expression neutral, my heart beating a steady, determined rhythm. The game had just changed. They had set the trap, but I was about to make sure the right person stepped in it. The discovery. As the dinner party moved toward its crescendo, the room was filled with the soft glow of candlelight and the buzz of self-congratulatory conversation. My father, Richard, was telling an old war story from the company's early days, a tale of corporate conquest that had the shareholders hanging on his every word. My mother was the perfect hostess, ensuring every glass was full, her smile never faltering. Ethan played his part to perfection, oozing charm and confidence, making promises of future growth that were as empty as his character. I remained a quiet observer, a coiled spring of anticipation, waiting for the curtain to fall on their elaborate production. The moment arrived with a sudden, jarring finality. The gentle classical music that had been playing in the background stopped abruptly. The heavy oak doors of the dining hall swung open and two uniformed police officers entered, their presence immediately sucking the air out of the room. They were accompanied by a man in a sharp suit who identified himself as an agent from the state's Financial Crimes Unit. The laughter died. Smiles froze. The carefully constructed facade of the evening shattered in an instant. I watched Ethan's eyes flick to me, a flash of triumph in them before it was replaced by a look of confusion. I kept my face a perfect mask of calm surprise. The agent stepped forward, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. We've received an anonymous tip regarding a significant case of embezzlement and corporate espionage at Anderson Global. The complaint specifically names Mr. Liam Anderson. A wave of murmurs washed over the room. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Richard stood stone-faced, the picture of a betrayed patriot. RCH, though I saw a muscle twitch in his jaw, Ethan, ever the actor, looked at me with wide-eyed disbelief. Liam, that's impossible, he said, his voice laced with just the right amount of shock. I rose slowly from my chair, the spotlight of every gaze in the room now fixed on me. I have nothing to hide, I said, my voice steady and clear. You are free to search me and my belongings. A tense silence fell. I saw Ethan exchange a quick, panicked glance with our father. This wasn't going according to their script. They had expected me to protest, to deny, to look guilty. My calm compliance had thrown them off. Richard gave a solemn nod to the officers. Please do what you must. We want to get to the bottom of this. The officers began their search. They went through my briefcase, examined my laptop, and checked my phone. I stood with my hands loosely at my sides, watching them work. Of course, they found nothing. The lead officer gave a slight shake of his head to the agent. There's nothing here. I saw Ethan's composure begin to crack. A frown creased his forehead. Richard's stoic expression tightened. They couldn't understand why the evidence wasn't there. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I stepped forward, addressing the agent directly. Perhaps the tip was correct about the crime, but wrong about the person, I said, my voice resonating in the silent room. If you're looking for evidence of a crime of this magnitude, I suggest you search the head of ventures, Ethan Anderson. The room erupted in whispers. Ethan scoffed, a forced, nervous sound. Me, Liam, this is pathetic. Are you trying to deflect? Richard's eyes burned into me, a silent command to stop. That's enough, Liam. Don't make this worse, he said, his voice a low growl. But I held my ground. I looked directly at Ethan, a cold, unwavering stare. Just a search. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, right? Ethan, caught in his own web, had no choice but to agree. He plastered a confident smirk on his face and spread his arms wide. Fine, search me, I have nothing to hide. An officer approached him. He checked Ethan's pockets, his wallet, his phone. Then he moved to the suit jacket hanging on the back of his chair. I held my breath, my heart pounding with a slow, heavy rhythm. The officer's hand went into the inner pocket and pulled out the manila envelope. The agent took it, opened the clasp, and slid out the contents, the forged contracts, the details of the offshore account, the burner phone, and the USB drive. The air in the room became thick and still. The shareholders stared, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. One of them, Marcus Vance, squinted at the documents. Wait a minute, that looks like the paperwork for the failed Southeast Asia venture. Another shareholder gasped. Is that an offshore account transfer? The dam of denial broke. Ethan lunged forward, trying to snatch the papers back. What is this? This isn't mine. I've never seen this before. He rifled through the documents, and when he saw my forged signature on the contract, his face turned a ghostly white. Richard stood frozen, his face ashen, the color drained from him as if he'd seen a ghost. My mother sank into her chair, her perfect composure finally crumbling, her eyes darting between me and Ethan in utter confusion. Liam, what is going on? She whispered, but her words were lost in the rising tide of chaos. I stepped forward again, my voice cutting through the noise, clear and sharp. I did not betray this company, but someone in this room tried to frame me for their own crimes. I looked from Ethan's panicked face to my father's shattered expression. The fear and helplessness in their eyes was all the confirmation I needed. Ethan stammered, pointing a trembling finger at me. It's his signature, he's setting me up, but his accusations sounded hollow and desperate. That signature is a forgery, I stated calmly. And I welcome a full investigation to prove it. The financial crimes agent signaled to the officers. They carefully placed the evidence into a sealed bag. The shareholders were now murmuring openly, their looks of suspicion fixed squarely on Ethan and Richard. Marcus Vance, a man whose respect my father had cultivated for decades, stood up, his voice shaking with fury. Richard, if this is true, this is an unforgivable betrayal. Anderson Global cannot tolerate this. The empire of lies my father and brother had built was collapsing around them, right here in their own dining room. I felt a strange, cold sense of release. I hadn't needed to raise my voice or make a single accusation. The truth, once revealed, was doing all the work for me. The investigation. The aftermath of the dinner party was swift and brutal. News of the incident ripped through the executive levels of Anderson Global like a shockwave. The whispers started immediately in hushed hallway conversations, in encrypted chat messages, and over frantic phone calls between investors. Ethan Anderson caught with evidence of embezzlement. Was Richard in on it? Liam Anderson was the whistleblower. The narrative they had so carefully crafted with me as the villain had been turned completely on its head. The board of directors convened an emergency meeting the following Monday. We gathered in the main conference room at our downtown Chicago headquarters, a sterile space with a panoramic view of the city that suddenly felt like an interrogation room. The air was thick with tension and recrimination. My father sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his posture rigid, his face a mask of grim control. For the first time, he looked his age. Ethan sat beside him, attempting a facade of indignant innocence, but the dark circles under his eyes and the slight tremor in his hands betrayed his fear. Richard opened the meeting, his voice strained, lacking its usual authority. The events of Saturday evening were a grave misunderstanding, he began, his gaze sweeping across the grim faces of the board members. A family matter that was unfortunately made public. I assure you we are handling it internally. But his attempt to downplay the crisis fell flat. Marcus Vance, the senior board member, cut him off, his tone sharp and unforgiving. A misunderstanding, Richard. The evidence was found in your son's possession. How do you explain the offshore account, the forged contracts? Richard faltered, launching into a weak explanation about a possible security breach, but his words carried no weight. The board members were like sharks that had scented blood. They circled, their questions relentless and precise. What happened to the capital allocated for the South American hub, Ethan? One director asked. And who authorized the payments to those shell corporations in Asia? Another pressed. Liam brought these budgetary irregularities to our attention months ago. Why were his concerns dismissed? I sat silent, letting the storm rage around them. Every question was a vindication, a confirmation of the warnings I had issued for years. Everything I had tried to expose was now being laid bare for all to see. Ethan, desperate to save himself, tried to deflect. He stood up, smoothing his suit, that familiar, slick smile plastered on his face. I believe this points to a significant failure in our accounting protocols, he said, gesturing toward me. The finance department, under Liam's leadership, clearly failed to maintain adequate oversight. It was a bold, reckless lie, and I almost admired his audacity. The finance department, my department, had been systematically locked out of his venture accounts for over a year, but I didn't have to say a word. The lead investigator from an independent forensic accounting firm hired by the board over the weekend raised his hand. Our preliminary review shows that all of the irregular transactions were authorized directly by the head of ventures, Mr. Ethan Anderson. There is no digital footprint implicating Mr. Liam Anderson in any of these actions. A heavy silence descended on the room. Ethan's smile vanished. He opened his mouth to argue, but no sound came out. My father bowed his head, rubbing his temples as if trying to stave off a migraine. There was nowhere left for them to hide. Under the immense pressure, the board's decision was swift and unanimous. Richard Anderson, CEO, and Ethan Anderson, head of ventures, were to be suspended indefinitely, pending the outcome of the official investigation. I was appointed interim chief operating officer, effectively taking control of the company's day-to-day functions. The same board members who had once passively watched my father sideline me were now looking at me with a newfound respect, openly endorsing my leadership. Ethan finally snapped. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his voice cracking with rage. "This is him. He's been planning this all along. He set me up." But his outburst only sealed his fate. The board looked at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. My father didn't even look up. I rose from my chair, my own voice calm and measured. "I'm not interested in revenge. I'm interested in saving this company." The meeting adjourned. As I walked back to my office, I felt the weight of the company settle onto my shoulders. From the large window, I looked out over the city, the Anderson Global logo reflected in the glass. It was a symbol of a legacy I had once been desperate to be a part of. Now, it was a mess I had to clean up. Later that afternoon, my office door burst open. Richard and Ethan stormed in, their faces contorted with fury. "Do you think you've won?" Richard snarled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Do you have any idea what you've done to this family?" I met his gaze without flinching. "I didn't do anything," I replied evenly. "I protected the company, something the two of." "You forgot how to do." Ethan stepped forward, his eyes blazing with hatred. "Protected it? You're a bitter, jealous snake, Liam. You could never compete with me, so you cheated." His words were meant to sting, but they felt pathetic. "If I'm the snake, why was the evidence in your pocket, Ethan?" I asked coolly. He recoiled as if struck. My father took a step closer, his face inches from mine. "You don't deserve to carry the Anderson name," he hissed. Then he delivered the blow that would change everything. "You were always a mistake, an ungrateful charity case we took in. You are nothing but my sister's bastard child." The words hit me with the force of a physical impact. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My sister's bastard child. The room fell silent. Even Ethan looked shocked, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. My father turned and left, pulling Ethan with him. The door slammed shut, leaving me alone in the sudden, deafening silence. His venomous words echoed in the space, rewriting my entire life. Bastard, ungrateful, charity case. Were these just the ravings of a desperate, angry man, or was he telling me a truth that had been hidden from me for 34 years? Suddenly, the pieces of my past began to realign themselves into a new, terrifying pattern. The plan. The word bastard echoed in the silence of my office long after my father and brother had gone. It was a word designed to wound, to strip away my identity and leave me with nothing. But instead of breaking me, it ignited a cold, determined fire within. I sank into my chair, the city lights beginning to blur through the window as my mind raced, replaying a lifetime of slights and dismissals. The memories were sharp and painful. Dinners where Richard would praise Ethan for the slightest achievement while my own accomplishments went unnoticed. The time I won a prestigious academic scholarship and my father's only comment was, "Don't let it get to your head." The subtle, constant reminders that I was somehow different, that I didn't quite belong. His words weren't just an insult. They were a key, unlocking a door to a past I never knew existed. I remembered a furious argument between my parents years ago, overheard through a closed door. My mother, her voice choked with tears, had cried, "You can't keep punishing him for Clara's mistakes." My father's reply had been a cold, dismissive mumble. At the time, I didn't know who Clara was. Now the name felt like a brand on my heart. Clara, my father's sister, my mother. This wasn't just about corporate corruption anymore. It was about my entire existence, which had been built on a foundation of lies. I needed proof. I needed the whole truth. My target was my father's home office at the Oakwood Hills estate, the nerve center of his empire, where he kept everything of importance locked away. Getting in undetected would be a challenge. I called Maria, the family's long-serving housekeeper, a kind woman who had always shown me a warmth my own mother never could. Under the pretense of checking on my mother's well-being after the stressful events, I learned that Richard and Alina would be attending a charity gala that Friday and wouldn't be home until late. That was my window. That Friday night, I drove back to the estate, the familiar roads feeling foreign and hostile. The house was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of security lights. I let myself in with my old key, the silence of the grand foyer amplifying the frantic beating of my heart. I went straight to my father's office. The room was a monument to his ego, all dark wood and leather, lined with books he'd never read. I started with his desk, sifting through files, but found nothing. My hands trembled as I moved to the large, built-in safe hidden behind a painting. I knew the combination. It was the founding date of the company, a number he revered more than any birthday. Inside, among stock certificates and property deeds, I found a sealed legal file. The label on the front reads simply C. Evans. My breath caught in my throat. I broke the seal. The first document was a birth certificate. My birth certificate, it listed my name as Liam Evans. Mother, Clara Evans. Father, unknown. The pages that followed told a devastating story. There were legal documents for my adoption, signed by Richard and Alina. And tucked at the very back was a handwritten note from my father. Adoption finalized. The Evans name is to be erased. He is an Anderson now. The subject is closed permanently. Clara Evans, my mother, a person, not just a mistake. The shame, the coldness, the constant feeling of being an outsider, it all made sense now. I wasn't their son, I was their secret, a living reminder of a family scandal they had buried. I took the file, my mind a whirlwind of anger and grief. This discovery changed the plan. It was no longer just about saving the company, it was about reclaiming my own story. They hadn't just tried to frame me for they had stolen my identity from birth. I now had the leverage to do more than just expose their financial crimes. I could expose the very foundation of their perfect family. Back in my apartment, I laid the documents out on my dining table. The plan began to form, precise and methodical, like one of my financial projections. First, I would solidify my control over the company. I spent the next few days working tirelessly, coordinating with the forensic accountants and the board. I drafted a comprehensive restructuring plan for Anderson Global, one that prioritized transparency, accountability, and sustainable growth. It was everything I had been advocating for years. I scheduled a presentation for the board and key shareholders, ensuring Marcus Vance was my primary supporter. I needed to prove that the company was not just viable without Richard and Ethan, but that it would be stronger. Second, I had to confront my parents with the truth I had discovered. But this confrontation wouldn't be an emotional outburst, it would be a strategic move. I arranged a meeting with Richard and Alina at the estate, sending a simple text: "We need to discuss my future and Clara's." When I arrived, the atmosphere was thick with dread. Alina sat on the sofa, wringing her hands. Richard stood by the fireplace, his posture as rigid as ever. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I placed the adoption file on the coffee table between us. "I know everything," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "I am Clara Evans's son." Alina let out a choked sob. Richard turned, his face a mixture of shock and fury. "So you've been snooping," he sneered. "She was a disgrace to this family, a foolish girl who got pregnant and threatened to ruin our name. We took you in, gave you a life she never could have. You should be thanking us." The sheer arrogance of his words was breathtaking. "Thanking you?" I shot back, my voice rising for the first time. "For a lifetime of being treated like a second-class citizen. For being your dirty little secret, you didn't save me, you used me to protect your reputation." The confrontation escalated, his venomous words washing over me, but this time they had no power. I was no longer the boy desperate for his father's approval. I was a man who knew the truth. I stood up to leave. "I don't need your name, I don't need this family," I said, turning my back on them for the last time. As I walked out, I heard Alina call my name, her voice breaking, but I didn't stop. The chains were broken. The final part of my plan was about to begin. The confrontation. A week after the raw, painful confrontation at the estate, the official report from the state's Financial Crimes Unit landed like a bombshell. Marcus Vance forwarded me the encrypted file on a Tuesday morning. As I sat in my quiet apartment, the rising sun casting long shadows across the floor, I opened it. The report was clinical and damning. Page after page detailed a complex web of deceit spun by Richard and Ethan Anderson. They had falsified earnings reports, created shell corporations to hide losses, and siphoned millions of dollars from the company over a period of 5 years. Every transaction was documented with digital precision: emails, server logs, and encrypted messages that laid their guilt bare. My own name was mentioned only once in the conclusion: "Liam Anderson has been fully exonerated." The evidence confirms he was the target of a deliberate scheme orchestrated by Ethan Anderson, with the implicit knowledge and approval of Richard Anderson. The news hit the business world with the force of an earthquake. Headlines screamed from financial news sites: "Anderson Global CEO and heir implicated in massive fraud scandal." The family name that Richard had spent his life protecting was now irrevocably tarnished, a synonym for corruption and betrayal. I expected to feel a sense of triumph, a surge of righteous vindication. Instead, there was just a quiet, hollow finality. The war was over. The emergency board meeting was called for the next day. The main conference room, which had been the site of so many of my past humiliations, now felt like my home turf. The board members and key shareholders filed in, their faces grim. There was no anger left, only a weary sense of disappointment and a desperate need for a path forward. Richard and Ethan were not present. Their lawyers had advised them against it. Their absence was a confession in itself, leaving a power vacuum at the head of the table that everyone expected me to fill. Marcus Vance began the meeting, his voice heavy. We have all read the report. The damage is severe, both financially and to our reputation. He looked around the room. The question is, what do we do now? The floor was opened, and the shareholders, once loyal to my father, spoke with a unified voice of condemnation. Years of lies, one said, shaking his head. We trusted Richard. He built this company, but he also early destroyed it. Another shareholder, a woman who had known my family for decades, turned to me. Liam, you tried to warn us. We should have listened. What is your proposal? This was my moment. I stood up not with arrogance but with a quiet confidence that came from knowing I was on the right side of the truth. I didn't speak of revenge or betrayal, I spoke of the future. I presented my restructuring plan, which I had titled Project Integrity. It was a detailed, multi-phase strategy to stabilize the company, restore investor confidence, and create a new corporate culture based on absolute transparency. I proposed liquidating the failed ventures Ethan had championed, renegotiating contracts to shore up our cash flow, and implementing a new system of checks and balances to ensure something like this could never happen again. As I spoke, I could feel the mood in the room shifting from despair to a cautious optimism. I wasn't just offering a solution, I was offering a vision. A vision of an Anderson Global that was stronger, leaner, and more ethical than ever before. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then Marcus Vance started to applaud. Slowly, others joined in until the entire room was standing, their applause a resounding vote of confidence. The board's decision was a formality. They voted unanimously to permanently terminate Richard and Ethan Anderson from all positions and to mandate the sale of their controlling shares to compensate the company for the damages. Then, Marcus Vance made the final motion. I propose we officially appoint Liam Anderson as the new Chief Executive Officer of Anderson Global. The vote was immediate and unanimous. I accepted the position with a simple nod. There were no grand speeches. The work ahead was too daunting for celebration. After the meeting, as I stood alone in my new office, my father's old office staring out at the Chicago skyline, I felt the full weight of the responsibility I had just inherited. I had won. I had not only saved myself, but I had saved the company. The battle for Anderson Global was over. But as I stood there, a deeper, more personal quest was just beginning. That evening, as I was packing up to leave, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My heart leaped. It was the same number that had sent me the warning before the dinner party. The message was short, but it changed everything once again. If you want to know the whole truth about your mother, meet me at the old Riverside Diner in Springfield. I'll be waiting. Someone else knew my story. Someone had been watching over me, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that I had to go. I had to know who was behind the curtain and what final secrets were waiting to be revealed. The aftermath. The drive to Springfield felt like a journey into a past I'd never known. The old Riverside Diner was a relic, a small, unassuming place on the edge of town, far from the polished world of Oakwood Hills. The neon sign flickered weakly in the encroaching twilight. When I walked in, the smell of old coffee and rain-soaked pavement filled the air. The diner was nearly empty, save for a woman sitting alone in a booth by the window, staring out at the dark, swirling water of the river. As I drew closer, my steps slowed. There was something hauntingly familiar about her profile, the line of her jaw, the way she held her head. She turned as she heard me approach, and the world tilted on its axis. Her eyes, a deep, sorrowful brown, were my eyes. Her face was worn with time and hardship, but the bone structure was unmistakably mine. Liam, she said, her voice a soft, trembling whisper that seemed to travel across decades to reach me. You have your father's height, but you have my eyes. I stood frozen, unable to speak. It was her, Clara Evans, my mother, not a ghost, not a shameful secret, but a real, living person sitting right in front of me. She reached a trembling hand across the table. Tears streamed down her face. I've watched you from afar for so long, she choked out. Richard, he made me disappear. He told me if I ever tried to contact you, he would ruin both of our lives. He staged my death to the family, paid me to stay away, all to protect the precious Anderson name. Her story came tumbling out, a torrent of pain and regret held back for 34 years. She had fallen in love with a man my grandfather disapproved of. When she got pregnant, Richard saw it as the ultimate betrayal, a stain on their perfect family portrait. He forced her into hiding, using his power and money to erase her existence. In return for her silence, he agreed to raise me, giving me the Anderson name as a shield, but it was a shield that also served as a cage. It was her love, she explained, that had been my invisible guardian. She had followed my career, read every article about Anderson Global, and even moved to a nearby town to be closer to me. I sent you that text. She confessed, her voice thick with emotion. I heard whispers through old contacts that Ethan was planning something. I couldn't let them destroy you. I sank into the booth opposite her, my mind struggling to process the enormity of it all. The anger I had felt toward the Andersons began to dissolve, replaced by a profound, aching sadness for this woman, for the life that had been stolen from her, from both of us. Mom, I whispered, the word feeling both alien and perfectly natural on my tongue. She broke down completely, her sobs echoing in the quiet diner. I reached across the table and took her hands in mine. In that moment, holding the hands of the mother I never knew, I felt a sense of belonging that the grand Anderson estate had never given me. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was home. In the weeks that followed, I helped my mother move to a small, charming house I bought for her in a quiet suburb of Chicago. It had a garden, something she had always dreamed of. Watching her plant daisies, her hands in the soil, a look of simple, unburdened joy on her face felt more rewarding than any corporate victory. Our reunion wasn't a dramatic, cinematic event. It was quiet, built on small moments. We drank coffee on her porch in the mornings, talking about everything and nothing. She told me about my biological father, a good man who had died in an accident before I was born. I told her about my life, the crushing loneliness, the comfort I found in the certainty of numbers, and the fight to reclaim the truth. The house slowly filled with warmth and laughter, things I had rarely experienced. We were two strangers bound by blood and a lifetime of loss, learning to be a family. It was in these quiet moments that the deep wounds of my past began to heal. I was no longer Liam Anderson, the unwanted heir, or Liam Evans, the hidden secret. I was just Liam, a son who had finally found his mother. My life became a study in contrasts. By day, I was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, making high-stakes decisions, rebuilding a broken company, and earning the respect of the business world. Under my leadership, Anderson Global began to stabilize and then to thrive. We became a model for corporate transparency. But at night, I would leave that world behind and drive to my mother's house. We'd have simple dinners, work in her garden, or just sit in comfortable silence. I found my true self not in the boardroom, but on that small porch with the woman who had given me life. The scars of the past remained, but they no longer defined me. They were a part of my story, a reminder of the battles I had fought and won. I had learned that true strength isn't about power or reputation, it's about integrity. It's about standing for the truth even when you're standing alone. And I learned that family isn't about a name or a legacy. It's about unconditional love, the kind a mother holds in her heart for a son she's never met, a love strong enough to cross decades of silence and light the way home.